Hello, Richard. Can you tell me a brief history of the character Richard?
A brief history. Well, born in Torrance, California in the year of 1963, and just it's difficult to put into words because the character wants to express um, using familiar words, using this language as we're speaking English now, in a natural way. But eventually, there comes a time when the character begins to question. Um, it begins to question its surroundings and its life, and it begins to wonder, who am I? What is this around me? Um, and so the character is eventually given a birth name. But before that happens, interestingly enough, the the character begins to just naturally move about as a as a living being, but has yet to identify with itself. Okay, so it moves about with arms and hands that it does not even know. It doesn't have cognizance yet. The as we're familiar, as we're trying to communicate here, these seemingly real experiences that the character has. So it begins to try and make sense of its surroundings naturally. And interestingly enough, it begins to develop some type or degree of awareness or of its surroundings somehow, but it can only do that based on what it observes. Okay, so it's observing the world around itself. It has yet to begin to communicate in any language. It is just producing sounds. Um, it doesn't even recognize or realize itself. It has even yet perhaps to see a reflection of itself. And interestingly enough, it begins to develop based on its surroundings, yeah, and based on what information is communicated to it. It appears that it begins to develop some type of awareness or cognizance of some type, but it's just part of everything already anyway. Um, so to try and put into words how this particular character came about, it can only go based on on a story of memory. It has a mind that it somehow, in some way, mysteriously accesses. It accesses this awareness. Now, the character, as it began to develop, just simply believed. It believed everything that it was told, and it could only express with sounds such as stirrings of emotions. It would cry if it was hungry, but it didn't know what hunger was. It was just simply existing. It was simply being. And so, as time went on, and then there's time as well. It does not know what time is, and it has yet to extrapolate a type of knowledge base, if you will, a knowledge base of information that it's taking in. And when we say information, it is, in a sense, forming. So the word, I mean, even the word itself, if you break that down, everything seemingly becomes a formation of some type. In formation, as though everything is in formations in some type of form. But the character did not recognize that until it began to develop and spend more time. There it is again, time. Because without time, then these appearances will not even appear as appearances, in a sense. There would not be appearances. And so the character simply went along with what it was told, what it was communicated with. It just went based on its seeming surroundings, right? It just went based on the surroundings. Now, it didn't understand what surroundings were until the mind of that character, the body that it self-identified with all along, began to notice and began to ask many, many questions, of course. But first, it had to learn how to communicate. Otherwise, it would not be able to express other than the sounds of crying or trying to use its voice to express in some way, making utterances. But it could only mimic, it could only copy what was around it, the environment, the surroundings. As it began to develop, it began to notice through eyes that it would eventually self-identify and say, well, these are my eyes. Interestingly enough, that didn't seem to begin until this was going on. You know, I mean, even in biology, let's say what we understand about the human form, yeah, is that the human form is a standard type of form as a human corporeal appearance, as a human being. But that has yet to be learned. So it is simply seemingly reacting. It's just seemingly reacting to its environment. It has no knowledge base yet. It has no way of identifying anything. It doesn't know anything, and it doesn't do anything because it has yet to develop a mind that somehow stores the information and then experiences, and then a center of self-identification with itself begins to somehow develop. Now, interestingly enough, in India, what they do and what they have done, from what I understand, is that they place an infant in front of a mirror, okay, somewhere between a duration of time between about 12 to 18 months of time. And as they do so, they draw a little dot between its eyes. And then they place the baby in front of the mirror. And it's really an interesting thing that happens. At first, it begins to reach out to that mirror and it sees the image of itself. It doesn't understand what that is. And it tries to, get that dot. It's attracted to it. And then some more time goes by. And then they place the baby again, try that again. And interestingly enough, instead of going out to the mirror, it goes here. And that is kind of an example of what seems to happen to the human form when it begins to self-identify with some type of center. It begins to self-identify with it. And so it just seems to be the exposure of this environment that seems to be a particular environment that's immediate to and associated with the observer. So there's the observer that's observing and is gradually developing a type of interfacing or integration with its surroundings. So this particular character was just in awe. This character that was given a birth name of Richard Ty Trevino. And that is a birthright as well, because surnames were learned later on. There's an ancestral tree that everybody has, see? And that's not even recognized yet. So the character goes on, and there's innumerable characters of human bodies going around. And it is thought and believed that, well, this must be mine. This body must be my body. And so it begins to think in terms of ownership, interestingly enough, to say that, well, these are my hands and this is my body. Therefore, this must be my life. And so that way of thinking begins to develop. Then there is the school system, because the body needs to integrate in what is believed and what is told. There's a society, there's a community, there are others like yourself. But wait a minute, it depends on the parental figures, doesn't it? So the parental figures for this body mind happen to have been indigenous to the area on the planet that we refer to as the United States, right, in California, okay? So 5 years go by, okay? In 1963, the character showed up, as we say, born. And so it began to go along with the natural way of development, you could say. And after so much time going by, it was just as inquisitive and curious as most other, body minds that are, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years of age, and they're asking a lot of questions usually, and they're asking a parental figure or the immediate adults that are their caregivers, if you will. So then one might ask, well, what about the orphan? Well, there are innumerable types of situations that can be identified with and could be defined, if you will. But for this character, it kind of it seemed to experience kind of a standard life in what's referred to as the United States. It learned the English language, it went to school. It was, the character was told, you have to go to school because you need to learn. What do I need to learn? You need to learn about life. You need to learn about how getting along with other people. You need to learn manners. You need to learn all kinds of innumerable things. But it was a step-by-step process, of course. You got to start at a certain grade. It's a gradation. They call it kindergarten, and then the next grade, first grade, second grade, elementary, and then so on and so forth. And so that's what this character went along with, because it thought, well, this seems to be the way to be. So if I should be this way, then I must go along with, you know what I mean, what I'm encountering, what I'm witnessing. So I'm observing this, right? And I go along, and so many years, I still have questions. Now, this particular character was exposed to what is referred to as Christianity, okay? Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the innocence of a child, as they say, is kind of a clean slate. In its innocence, it has no real opinions about anything. It is still learning. It has yet to self-identify to that extent to say, well, I know who I am. I'm confident who I am. And that level of awareness, that has yet to gradually develop. Interestingly enough, for this character, I was continuously questioned well into my adult life that it believed it was living. So as it began to question, it began to seek, a staunch seeker, always asking about everything that it had encountered. So everything that it encountered, it wanted to know about it. And it thought, if I knew enough, then all these questions would go away. All these questions that I call my own questioning about what I witness around me, perhaps there might be somewhere in some literature, in some form, that I can find to explain how and why I continue to question. Why do I continue to seek? I thought it would stop. This character thought it was going to stop, but it didn't. In fact, it increased. In fact, it got to a point where it was almost too much to take. The seeking was so strong that it began to ponder about things. It began to ask questions that nobody could answer. No one could answer the questions that this character had. And then it began to, well, why is that? How can I be that special? How can I be that unique? That can't be it. I appear similarly to other human body forms. So why do I keep questioning? Why do I keep seeking? And which brings this character to that point in time when I was going to refer to being exposed to Christianity, because this body mind's family tree, if you will, yeah, the ancestral tree. If we're going to look at it in the sense of DNA and all that sort of thing, but we don't know that yet. So all we know is that we have a family, we have a surname. That's what we're told. We have a certificate of authenticity when we're born. And so that certificate of authenticity is what? The birth certificate. Therefore, I can say I'm a unique individual because I have my birth certificate. See, that's how I self-identify with myself. This is how I can distinguish between myself and others, because I have a very unique certificate. Interestingly enough, that's never questioned, really. No, that's not questioned, because the body mind is too busy trying to figure out where it is, where it is, why it is the way that it is, and how did that come about. It was a natural process. It seemed to have been a process that happened as the body mind, the character began to develop, and it began to create its own beliefs, that kind of thing. But I'm trying to share with you right now those kind of experiences, but there are so many that to try to encapsulate the story of this character would be rather difficult to do or to express by itself unless it's questioned. So it recognizes that if I, or this body mind as a character that calls itself I or me, as a familiar way of using pronouns, yet there was a time when all of that fell away. Now, if we start getting into the main theme and the subject of non-duality, this is where it kind of begins to become noticeable and recognized by others that have similar experiences. When I say others, I mean the experience of what I refer to as the conjured self. Now, that phrase conjured self is the same as saying the me or the I, as other non-duality speakers say. There are a few prominent, I'm not going to name drop, you already know who the names are. You've interviewed, I'm sure, several so far of the prominent, what I refer to as neo-advaitans. Now, the separate sense of self fell away. And I can pinpoint, this body mind can pinpoint and say that it was around the year of 2016 interestingly enough, because it can recall the falling away and how it felt. How can I use an example of another prominent speaker? Is it all right if I mention any other speakers here? Okay, there is Tony Parsons, very, very well known in these circles of neo-advaitins, of non-duality speakers. And he mentioned about the falling away as there was a walk in the park, and then, well, there was somebody walking in the park, and then all of a sudden, there was just a walk in the park. And that's kind of his best description, that particular character, that body, mind, action figure, what I refer to as the self-conjured self, the conjured self. And that's how the best way that he could express. Now, interestingly enough, all these other non-duality speakers, and what I refer to as neo-advaitins, is still taking the, in a traditional sense, Advaita Vedanta, of the source coming from India, going as far back as you can with written records of the Sanskrit, the Upanishads, you know, the Gita, the Gitas and the Upanishads. I think there's 108 of them, the Upanishads. But interestingly enough, we could say that there is a noticeable resurgence somehow, a resurgence of the of those teachings of the Upanishads that were mentioned all those hundreds of years ago when it first began to be uttered. It was the uttered word at first before it was scribed onto parchments or whatnot, whatever type of, you know, scribing of the Sanskrit from right to left began. But before that, it was just spoken. It was the spoken Advaita before it became scribed. But nobody can pinpoint and know when that actually began. And so for this body mind character, it fell away whilst observing two physicists. One of them is well renowned as Dr. Thomas Campbell. Now, he wrote and published a 3-part series, My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything. And he's been going around. He's very well known in international circles for those that understand about consciousness research. That's what he calls himself, a consciousness researcher. He's an ex-NASA physicist. He's retired now, and that's what he seems to be doing. Okay, and that's that character. This character was observing some YouTube presentations and then came across a second equivalent physicist or researcher, consciousness researcher by the name of Anthony Peake. So there I was observing both of them conversing about consciousness research. And that was when the falling away seemingly happened to this character, whereby as they were expressing, suddenly I recognized that it was kind of subtle, that almost felt as though I was outside of this body, but at the same time still feeling the emotions and the sensations and all of the different 5 sensory modalities of hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, you know, that type of thing. But then it suddenly gradually became an expansive type of awareness whereby there was no longer this focus on this character. Somehow it's as though there was this expansion of awareness that just cannot put into words how that happened and why it happened. I don't have, this character has no why or how to explain that a type of experience. Just recalling how that felt, where there was no pinpointing of here or there, or in space and time, coordinates, you know, like places on a map, you know, there were no longitudinal, latitudinal marks to to go based on. There was no reference points anymore. It was as though it was an endless expansion, a boundless awareness and expansion that has no end. The only phrase that this body mind can use is infinitudinal complexification. So you see, by using a phrase like that, this body mind has yet to hear anybody else. I mean, thousands of other body minds and characters that are into neo-advaita have never said that. I've only found it one place, only one website out of all the millions and millions of websites that are out there. So I thought there must be something to that then. So I started studying that, and I looked into the mystics published this book. Do you see what I see? That's back there on display. And that's when it continued to dawn on this body-mind character to say, I give up. It said, I give up. I'm not seeking anymore. That's it. Because now it recognizes that it is not separate. It's not unique. It's not special. It's just an apparent appearance. So you hear that a lot from other neo-advaitins. The one in Germany, Andreas Mueller. He says this a lot. See, so they're all expressing the same message, okay? And they call it a message. Some say it's, it's empty fullness, Tony Parsons said. And then selfing, as Paul Hederman says. And so you see each of these neo-advaitins seemingly expressing the same thing, that boundless expansion, because what does Andreas Mueller call it? Something with wonder, timeless wonder, isn't it? Timeless wonder, yeah, timeless wonder. So what I'm trying to do, I know I've been skipping, from one area to another, and I didn't even expand on how this character came across these spiritual teachings and Christianity and religion, but there's just so much. There's so much. The journey that this body mind seemingly took was very arduous and very tumultuous, and had many bumps and hills and curves and turns on that path, that it used to think that it was on a path. This body mind used to believe that if it sought enough, if it looked into enough subjects about spirituality and spiritual teachings, that it would eventually find the answer. There is no particular answer to all of this. There is none. There is no particular specific teaching that could be taught to any character, any body mind. It's just somehow a natural occurrence, I guess you could call it, an event that has been described in so many different ways by those that are recognizing that there are no particulars, there are no specifics, there is no separation, one without a second. And there have been many previous mystics, and Ramana Maharshi and some of these others that were followed as gurus. They were looked upon as great masters and spiritual teachers and things like that. But then this also recognized that doesn't even matter. And they even said themselves, nothing, no thing stands alone and does not matter on its own. There's a phrase that this body mind often uses, is that everything and no thing is inseparably so and not so ad infinitum. Or you could say the absolute Brahman in a traditional sense. You could say that. So far, that's what's coming up so far. That's what I can express, what this body mind can express for now. In the setting of a satsang, this body mind action figure has had satsangs in the past, but just a few seekers, seekers that were still stuck in that self-identification with itself, with its character. It had yet to collapse. Eventually, it might. in mind. And it may happen in such a way that if it's exposed to a certain type of a setting, you can't really say it's a particular type of a setting. It can't really be pinpointed. Like I said, the best that this body mind was able to do was to give you a year, 2016. And I'll give you a month of June, when it was listening to those two astrophysicists having that conversation, Dr. Thomas Campbell and Anthony Peake. And they were speaking of some very, very deep thoughts and concepts and ideas that the average person might not even ever consider, not even in standard academia. That's what's really interesting about what seemingly happens to certain non-duality speakers, neo-advaitas, whereby there's some type of falling away, and there's something that seemingly happens to them, but it's not really happening to them. It's just a natural, I can't even call it a process. I don't even know what to call it. But we try to figure out a way to use the English language to come up with terminologies and definitions and words so that we can try to do what? Are we trying to do anything? No, there is no try. And there's not even a do, there's just be. There's just being, beingness, beingnessing, isnessing. You hear those type of words being uttered by the non-duality speakers, the neo-advaitas. They speak this way. They weren't always speaking this way, in this manner, referring to, one without a second. There is no separation. Those type of phrases that are familiar to those that are simply expressing. And they're not expressing from that character body mind anymore. They're seemingly not doing that. And then the seeker comes across the neo-advaita that's speaking this way, and they go, whoa, what is this? So you see, in a natural way, just by expressing as the neo-advaitin does, it grabs the attention of the seeker. And once it does that, then most likely that falling away is going to happen, but it's going to occur in such a way that it may not even be recognized. The body mind is not going to recognize. It's not even going to be prepared for it. It's not going to be ready for it. It's going to happen so subtly or even so spontaneously that it's going to catch itself going, well, wait a minute. Where did all this self-identification go? Where did it go? Was I ever that which I thought I was as an individual, unique, terminally unique person? Was I at that point? What's really interesting, it can recall, the body mind can still recall and have memories, but it can't, was it really interesting, it can't pinpoint exactly in space and time when the falling away happened, when it fell away. And this boundless awareness just simply seemingly replaced that limited awareness that it used to recognize and self-identify with. Because that's what the conjured self does. It conjures a belief. It conjures a belief that it's living alone. It's living its own life. So it takes ownership and it sticks with mine. And then it has fears about that. And then this is where all the suffering, the unnecessary suffering, the self-afflicted suffering. Even the Buddha spoke of this. Even the Buddha, all the great masters have spoken of this self-afflicted, unnecessary suffering that's going on. It's all self-afflicted, but the body mind action figure doesn't recognize that. The self-conjured self continues to conjure uniqueness and specialty and separation. My life, my thoughts, my ideas. It just sticks with mine. If it could just drop all of that, it would recognize it, but it can't. It doesn't know how. It won't know how. It's either going to seemingly happen to that body mind that it will recognize that it's not separate. It's not a separate individual being. It never was. It's always been. In fact, the closest that you could describe this is the innocence restored. When it was doing this, and it didn't have to have a whole bunch of thoughts. It was just being. It was just simply being. It was showing up. It was manifesting. It was a manifestation of a living being. That's it. It didn't need to figure out why it was and how it was. None of the questions came up. And it's as though the body mind goes around in a full circle, comes back to that raw beingness. It's so difficult to put a term to this sensation, what seemingly happens, as though it's an event. It's not really an event. But getting back to this character, when I would say it was right around the 7th or 8th year, right around that time, when the family, the cousins, uncles, aunts. I had a very religious auntie, Aunt Tony, and I'm the youngest. This body mind action figure character is the youngest of 3. I have an older sister, I had an older brother, and well, he passed away. Don't have to go through that story now. Everybody has a story. Now, it's not that they have the story, it's just seemingly that way that a body mind gathers experiences and that becomes a story. When it starts out as a baby, human form, an infant, and then it goes through what is seemingly a story of its life. Yeah, the story of its life. And that could be said about absolutely everything that is thought to be specifically so, such as the planet itself. There's a story of Earth. Yeah, there's a story of Earth. So speaking this way now, and then looking back at the body-mind experiences that it was seemingly going through, when it came across Christianity, oh man, it was really questioning. It was actually going to Sunday school, and I was with my family. We were very religious Baptists. Now, again, in the innocence, when the body mind action figure is still relatively innocent and it's still learning about where it is, and with the family members that it has, the cousins, aunts, uncles, and so on and so forth. So this action figure came across Christianity because it thought that was the right thing to do. The family went to church, and the parents, my parental figures, they said, my mom and dad said you should go to church. It's good for you. Oh, my Aunt Tony was all for it because she just happened to be that way. She was very religious. And so this body mind found itself among these people that were doing that, among the family members. And so I still was questioning, why are we praying so hard and we're knelt down, and my Aunt Tony's convulsing, and she says she speaks in tongues and that she has the Holy Spirit in her. And so, in my innocence, I was observing all these things that were going on, and I was told I should just simply go with it. So I did. But then as I got older, I began to question it, but I wouldn't tell anybody because I didn't want to offend anyone, because every body mind action figure seems to have their own beliefs. And if you notice, if you begin to question, and some people get very sensitive about their beliefs, so I kept quiet because I didn't want that a bad reaction. I wanted to respect my elders. So my Aunt Tony was the way she was, but I didn't know that back then. Of course not. There were a lot of things that I couldn't recognize and I didn't understand. And the understanding, in retrospect, is a lot clearer now. It's really interesting. We say we're in the year 2020 now. There's a saying that goes, hindsight is 2020. I think, and I'm not going to say that it's a belief. It's just a recognition that the year 2020 is that kind of retrospection that's seemingly going on across the planet, where it's going back to the original teachings, the Upanishads and the Gitas, the ancient one, the very first utterances of what has always been the absolute Brahman, the absolute. And there are no particulars, no specifics. There is it one that stands alone. Nothing stands alone. No thing stands alone. It's everything and no thing, inseparably so and not so. You can't just say, well, it's separately so. That's it. No, you got to include the and not so. Another way of saying that is it is all always. It's always all ways. And even the ways that cannot be considered or thought about. So it's always all ways. Everything and nothing is separately so and not so. Ad infinitum. And it's just the absolute. It's Brahman. And that's about the best way to summarize that so far. I could go back to and expand on some of the other chapters of the story of this body, mind, this character, but if that comes up, then that will be mentioned. So that's about the best way I could so far summarize, I guess you could say. Summarize the character.
Thank you, Richard. What a fascinating story. That's fascinating. Who do you resonate the most? Like which speakers, do you resonate with the most?
I would have to go naturally with Paul Hederman. The reason why is because this character seems to have similar qualities, I guess you could say qualitative expressions. We come from the same area. I guess the environment has a lot to do with it, from California. I grew up there in Redondo Beach, and Paul Hederman is very familiar with that. So I've spoken to him a few times, and just seem to naturally resonate. Why? I guess that for those reasons. I don't know. Perhaps there's more to it than that. It's just a recognition. It's a recognition, the manner by which he speaks, and speaking in terms of selfing. He uses his own terminologies, and I understand he has certain literature and books, and he has whole satsangs, and I've attended many of the satsangs that he holds, and he's got a website, of course, and that kind of thing. But each new advaitin seems to be compelled to gravitate towards sharing, expressing. There's some type of an urge that happens when the falling away occurs, when the expansion of awareness, or whatever you want to call that, the empty fullness, all of that. There's some type of urge to share this, to not keep it to, the self, not keep it to the character, because it just somehow feels that if everybody recognized this message, then there would be less suffering, and that's what the Buddha was striving for, wasn't he? Sure he was. Siddhartha, the stories, the ancient stories about seeking liberation. Liberation from what? Well, you're already liberated, but you just don't know it. What's interfering with that? Well, beliefs, yeah. Trying to take control of a life that's not even one's own life. Nobody has a life of their own. They never did. They just thought they did. See, it's in the thinking. It's in the cognition. So there's a paradox in all that as well. Whatever a body mind believes, then it's going to go based on that belief, and believe that it needs to believe what it believes, and that as though it needs to know what it knows. Let's take philosophy, for example. I think, therefore I am. No. Mm-mm. I think, therefore I am. No, you already were I am. You didn't require thinking to do that. There is no doing involved. There is no, it's not even any knowing involved. It's being. It's in the beingness. It's in the natural beingness. It's a very, very natural way of expressing just a natural beingness. It's just going along with the flow of Brahman, the absolute. It's a constant flow of energy. It's a river flowing, and try swimming against that current. That current is just a natural current. Those that are still self-identifying with the body, mind, action figure, the self-conjured self, are swimming against that current, but they don't recognize it yet. Eventually, perhaps, it is most likely going to, that falling away however that might happen, as though it's happening when it really isn't happening. There's a paradox again. There's so many rich paradoxes in that falling away sensation that's difficult to put into words. So that's what's come up so far. And you know what's really interesting? It's a spontaneous reaction. It's not planned, never planned. Not a single satsang is ever planned. And that's taking it all the way back to India. The very first ashram was set up for the satsang to take place anywhere on the planet. It could be absolutely any environment on this planet, and even other planets that are not known or knowable. There's probably billions of Earth-like planets similar to this, the story of Earth. Yeah, and it's even written in the Gitas that is so. Yeah. That's what's coming up so far.
Thank you. You're talking about mind earlier. What is the mind and where is it?
There is no real location in space and time for a single mind. The single mind seems to be something that's conjured. The single mind is conjured along with the self-identification with that body mind, that character, that self that believes it is an individual self alone, and that there's an everybody and everything else out there in the world, that there's a societal structure out there, and I'm alone in this body of mine. And then there's this mind that I believe I have. It's my own brain. So it points up here because it associates the subjectivity, the subjectivity and objectivity, because it's still thinking in terms of my brain, my mind, my life, my body. All the ownership, the self-proclamations, the self-proclaiming of its own self that it believes it is. There is no self, but there is believed, in the beliefs, it is thought that there's a higher self, there's different levels to achieve, there's cognizance, there's consciousness, and that's when it starts getting what I refer to as New Agey. This body mind went through all the New Agey stuff back in the 1990s as well. I used to go to psychic fairs, I used to look into UFOs, all of the mysterious things on this planet. This body mind action figure, this particular subchondra self went along with all the different material. There's just all these different books on all kinds of things, everything from Alpha Centauri to Zeta Reticuli, so to speak. But you have then there's exopolitics. There's about other alien races from other Earth-like planets throughout the universe, and it just goes off in all kinds of different tangents when it comes to the imagination of the conjured self and what it conjures. It's just extraordinary what it does with a mind that it believes it's its own mind, and then it takes an imagination that it believes it's its own imagination. So it believes it has a mind, and not only a mind of its own, it believes it's conjuring original thoughts and ideas that nobody else could possibly fathom or think about. It does that. It does that because what is it doing? It's trying to make sense of its own feeling of individuality. So it gets stuck and it orbits around that mind that it thinks is its own mind, of the body mind, the action figure. It self-identifies with that. It looks in the mirror and says, wow, you're looking kind of rough today. You are, because it still believes it's a me, and then it still believes that there's a you sitting on a chair, and then there's me sitting on this chair, and it's still thinking in terms of you're over there. See, again, separate coordinates in space and time. You're in a separate place of your own, and this is a me, and it's a separate place of its own. No, it was never that way. It was only thought to be that way, where I'm here and you're there. No, there is no here, there is no there. There's only everywhereness. See.
Thank you, Richard. Any books that you like that you have read? You mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads. Anything else that you?
There's no other literature that if this body mind were to this Neo-Advaitin, this calls itself a Neo-Advaitin now because it self-identifies with. There's still a self-identification going on, by the way, but it's replaced with more of a togetherness, like it's part integrated, like a link in a chain, if you will. It's not alone. It recognizes it's not alone. It's just going along with the current of Brahman, of the absolute. It's going along with that current of every awareness. Yeah, and that's continuous, alpha and omega. There's no beginning and no end to anything.
For people that are listening to this, Richard, what is a Brahman and what's the absolute?
Brahman and absolute, that is going back to the origins of the very first utterances of that which is referred to as the infinite or the infinite mind. The absolute is, Brahman is just every single idea and thought that could ever be conjured by what is believed to be separate. Now, this sense of separation is not a bad thing. It never was. Or neither is it a good thing, or it's not special. It's just simply noticing and pointing to, well, that apparently appears to be going on over there. It's as though there's an energy, and there's a universal energy, and that this Brahman is likened to, you could say, the galactic center, if you will. I mean, you could go and use all kinds of different concepts and ideas, but it's even beyond that. It's not any particular belief. It's not any particular one, but some of the best, it seems, best energy or the origins of the recognition and the falling away that seems to be more spontaneous to that body mind that's still riddled with the self-affliction of self-identifying with itself, separation. It's the Upanishads, and it could be any one of them. And in number and the countenance, I think just something like 108 of them. I think there are about 108 Upanishads. And then, of course, there's the Gitas. But the Gitas kind of expand on referring to processes and reincarnation. It starts getting into those things. But it's simply a story. It's a story about that which is always. But it's not anything in particular, and it's not anything specific. It's all of it combined. Absolutely everything that could ever be thought about and cognized, and even beyond that as well. It's both. It is what is and what is not. Both is and is not. Real and unreal. Observable and unobservable. All at the same time.
Richard, do you have any? Do you speak anywhere? Do you have a book or anything that you're doing currently?
Well, a book. If it were going to be a book, all of that information is held in a website. I consider this body might consider to write a book and consider to go travel around the world, which you can't do anymore. And so it is offered, one-to-one satsangs or a group satsang in Zoom. I've got a regular Zoom room already standing by, if that were to be the case. And so it's simply called the Conjured Self. And my website is in the Angel Fire domain. Should I tell you what the URL is?
For sure. Share it to the people that are watching this. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's, of course, the HTTP is most site. All the sites start out with. And then it's, of course, the / and the www. Yeah. So it's www.angelfire.com / T is in Tango, X is in X-ray, then the number 3, then another / Yantra Om. Yantra, YANTRAOM, Om. Yantra Om. Yeah.
You send that link to me so that I can also post it with the YouTube.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
So it's HTTP, of course, the usual beginning there. Then the www.angelfire.
Well, I mean, share it to me on Messenger, and I'll post it with the
okay.
after this.
How about in this chat here? Is there a little chat window?
There is, but you can just put it in the Messenger, and I'll add it later. But I
I'll
just
do
want to
that later then.
thank you for your time, Richard.
That's
This
quite
was
all
really
right.
fascinating to listen to you about, listen to this character, about this beautiful conjured story, the
Mm,
conjured self.
hmm
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm just going to pause it here. We're just going to
Okay.
chat for